Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon, good evening, good night if you're across the world. So it is a great pleasure for me to welcome you to the second day of Scholars Strike for Liberation, formerly known as Scholars Strike Canada. My name is Julie Vig, and I am an assistant professor of South Asian cultures at York University in Toronto. Before I describe the program for today, I want to begin by acknowledging the land on which we are gathered today. But as this is a virtual event, we are not sharing the same space, and we invite you to take a moment to acknowledge and recognize the Indigenous land on which you are located. So for those of us located in Toronto, we want to acknowledge that we are on unceded, stolen land of Indigenous people belonging to many different communities, such as the Anishinaabeg, Mississaugas of the Credit River, the Haudenosaunee, and the Huron-Wendat. And today, this land is home to many First Nation, Inuit, and Métis communities. We are deeply grateful to have the opportunity to learn through these beautiful teachings the many ways we can engage in generative refusals on this land on which Indigenous resistance and refusals have been ongoing for centuries. So our program for today consists of two teachings. So the first one from 11:05, so about a few minutes, to 12:20 p.m. Eastern Time, is titled U.S. Military Presence in the Caribbean, the Devastation of Hurricane Melissa, Caribbean Scholars and Activists in Conversations on Forms of Refusals and Care. So this first teaching will feature Tamanisha John, Angelique Nixon, Kimberly Phillip, Danuta Radzik, Christoph Simpson, and Honor Ford Smith. The second teaching, which is titled After the Ceasefire, Palestine, Israel, and the Middle East, will take place from 1 p.m. to 2 p.m. Eastern Time, and will feature Muhammad Ayesh, Nahela Abdo, and Beverly Bain. So without any further delay, let me leave the space to the panelists of the first teaching, and I wish you all a beautiful day of teaching, learning, and engaging in generative refusals of genocide, racism, Islamophobia, fascism, and repression of academic freedom. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Julie. And I just want to welcome this panel, and I will take my exit, but thank you all for doing this, and good afternoon and welcome. We're so happy. Okay, I'll turn it over to Anna. Lovely to see you. Lovely to see you, Angelique. Oh my God. And to meet Kimberly and Anna, and it's an honor. Okay.
You're muted.
Thanks very much, Bev, and good morning, everybody. It's wonderful to see everyone's face and to have this opportunity to discuss together the question of the U.S. military presence in the region and also the connections between that and the disaster relief that is flooding into the Caribbean presently. I'm concerned because I don't see Christoph. So, Bev, I'm going to ask someone.
He is here.
Oh, he's here. Great. Okay. So, my name is
Danuta is missing now.
Yeah, but she's coming in late because she has Danuta will join us at about 11:30 as she had another session to do before. So she's going to be late.
Okay.
But she'll be here. Okay, so I will just introduce myself. My name is Honor Ford Smith. I'm a scholar artist and I work between Canada and Jamaica, which is where I'm originally from. And I'm a member of the Caribbean Women of the Diaspora. I have a long history of activism in the women's movement in the region. So it's wonderful, again, I want to say, to have everybody here. We are going to go through, because we have a very short time, we're going to go through alphabetically through the last names of people. And we're going to give everybody a chance to speak for about 5 minutes, to make a statement for about 5 minutes. And then we'll open it up for a discussion between the panelists first. And after that, we hope to be able to take questions from the audience. So without further ado, let me introduce our first speaker, who is Tamanisha John. Tamanisha is Assistant Professor of Black Politics in the Department of Politics at York University, and she's a member of the Black Alliance for Peace and the Caribbean Solidarity Network. Tamanisha, over to you.
Hello, good morning and good afternoon. I think that since this panel is on the U.S. military presence in the Caribbean and the devastation of Hurricane Melissa, I was asked specifically to make some commentary on Haiti, and so I will make those commentaries and try to keep them short. As people on this panel would be aware, Haiti was impacted and has been impacted negatively by both the US and other military forces in the Caribbean long before the current iteration of, military buildup that a lot more people are talking about now. And Haiti was also negatively impacted by Hurricane Melissa, that, devastated and impacted more than 6 million people across the Caribbean, predominantly in Jamaica, Haiti, and also a lot of the infrastructural damage in Cuba. I guess that one of the things that I would say is a lot of the military presence that we are currently seeing in the Caribbean region, especially as it regards drone strikes or even what seems to be the direct collaboration of a independent government enacting US policy has seen a high expression in Haiti that hasn't had self-determination in over 2 decades. They haven't held elections. They've been under formal tutelage or formal occupation as mandated by UN Resolution 1542. And in that, they've also seen an influx of weapons. I believe that there are over 500,000 arms in Haiti, as well as, external mercenaries operating in Haiti using drones manufactured in both Canada and the US to murder Haitians. And all of this has been done with the approval or the okaying of regional governments, not just in the Caribbean, but also in Latin America. And so it is no shock that a month after a drone strike killed 8 children in Haiti and I think murdered over 50 others, we're now seeing airstrikes in the Caribbean region becoming more normalized against other countries. Yet when we talk about sort of airstrikes in the region and extrajudicial murders in other countries, those same types of extrajudicial murders are occurring in Haiti, with people murdered by drones being referred to as bandits. And the only reason that we know that drones initially had murdered those 8 children was because of journalistic reporting that isn't necessarily happening for the other attacks occurring in Haiti. As we know, not only was Haiti impacted by Hurricane Melissa, but Haiti also has a long history of being impacted by, environmental disasters, as do other states in the region. And during those periods, there's always this influx of aid that doesn't necessarily reach populations that are on the ground. And so even in the wake of Hurricane Melissa, you've had a lot of, Jamaicans, people in Cuba, and also people in Haiti having to warn people about where not to send funds because those funds tend to go and, enrich foreign capitalists that are operating in those economies under the guise of humanitarian aid, but really to undermine institutions in those countries. And so I guess today I'm interested in a conversation that connects sort of military buildup and environmental, aid in ways that also talk about how disaster aid is often used to fuel US and external military contractors in the region. And so even when we look at a lot of the Red Cross and other aid that went into Haiti in the wake of the earthquake, especially in 2021, I believe a lot of those went to US State Department contractors and not, NGOs, as people commonly only talk about. And I'll stop there.
Thanks a lot, Kimali. Oh, sorry, Tamanisha. That's really vital information because so often in the region we get really not much detail about what's happening in Haiti, even though there are often boats that land up in Jamaica in particular with Haitians only, and they're they find themselves being summarily and illegally sent back to Haiti. So any information that we can get that help us to understand Haiti better is much appreciated. So thank you. Over now to Angelique Nixon, who is a Black queer artist scholar, born and raised in the Bahamas, but based now in Trinidad and Tobago. She's also a lecturer at UWI's Institute for Gender and Development and is the director of the feminist LGBTQ organization CAISO, which advocates for gender justice in Trinidad and Tobago. She's the author of Saltwater Healing and the award-winning book Resisting Paradise. And she has 20 or more years of activism on the ground around both sexual and LGBTQ rights, migration, and also environmental justice. Over to you now, Angelique.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for inviting me to be a part of this conversation. I wanted to just echo and build upon what Tamanisha has offered already, which is that Haiti should be at the center of all of our conversations, especially when it comes to trying to understand colonial violence and its remnants and the lingering impacts of colonialism. And I think what I want to just add into the conversation is that, as we are, and CAISO, the organization that I work with, we signed on, of course, to a number of statements, demanding that our region, demanding attention to U.S. imperialism and and the dangers that the dangerous moment that we are in, and speaking out, of course, for peace. We participated in Trinidad and Tobago. There was a call by several organizations to have a peace gathering, which would happened not last Sunday, but the Sunday before. Hopefully, folks know about that. And so there's been a lot of response on the ground. In my writing and work and in my activism, I think it's so important that we center Haiti and talk about the fact that that U.S. imperialism continues to impact our region in very intense and specific ways through external dependency. We could talk about that through not only through Haiti, but we can think about the blockade in Cuba. So we think about both Cuba and Haiti and situate where we are. We know that that the real threats of U.S. imperialism and this kind of violence is absolutely it's pressing, it's here. And I think what I also wanted us to talk a little bit about is, the ironies of that, because I'll just bring into the space that, Mia Motley said, she said that they make a desert and call it peace, right? And I think that that's an important quote for us to reflect on around how so many of our revolutions and forms of resistance have been pacified. So I think when we talk about US imperialism, we have to think about it both from the externally and very clear from the blockade to the ways that Haiti has been controlled and occupied and been made incredibly vulnerable, all the way to the ways that our governments wield very little power, especially when we think about the CARICOM response to what's happened to Haiti. Tamanisha mentioned the failed attempts at trying to quote unquote control what is happening in Haiti with the levels of violence and political instability, but the lack of recognition that has been created, and our CARICOM response has been, well, quite frankly, dismal. There have been very few Haitian-led solutions. Even though folks call for regional collaboration, we haven't seen it, especially when we think about the most recent US-led intervention of Kenyan troops, which has been widely a failure. We think about all of these external forces that create dependency and debt. And I want to also mention and think about what has happened in Jamaica, right? And when we think about the tourism industry and the tourism industry that relies on external dependency and the what has happened in we've seen this during hurricane seasons again and again, the level of devastation and the intensity of storms, of course, fueled by the climate crisis and fueled by climate chaos that we are in. And then what we're seeing now in Jamaica, this press to recover, that recovery is only seen through a capitalist and dependency, external dependent uh, pathway that, okay, we have to the tourism industry has to be back up and running for recovery. I think that that's really uh, dangerous. And I think that gives us a lot, I think, talk about the interconnections across this moment that we were in, and the kinds of challenges that we face as a region, and the intersections between dependency, between the climate chaos that we find ourselves in, and our calls for peace in this moment where we have a great division across within CARICOM, at least from the perspective of Trinidad and Tobago. And I would love for us to talk more about that. I don't want to take up too much of our time. I have a lot of things to share, but I just want to share that as my opening thoughts and reflections, that we absolutely have to stand in solidarity against U.S. military presence because we know what it has done. We know that historically from Haiti to Cuba to Grenada. We should also bring in Grenada here to think about the Grenadian Revolution and how that so many of our revolutions have been either pacified or outwardly controlled, and stopped or completely destroyed. And so I want us to think about that today. And then also highlight in Trinidad and Tobago. I know that it could feel very much like, well, what is our government doing? But just to say that civil society organizations and community groups and activists are definitely speaking out. And there's a lot of critique about what is happening. And happy to share more about that as we continue the conversation. Thank you.
Great, thank you. I think it's important to remember that there is a history of activism in relation to U.S. imperialism in the region. Apart from the obvious case of Cuba, there have been attempts over the years to make regional responses to U.S. Domination. I remember, for example, the attempt by a number of intellectuals in the region, post Grenada, and through George Laming's Committee for Regional Sovereignty, of which I was part, attempts to try to speak out about the question of sovereignty regionally and to critique U.S. cultural imperialism, as well as its active military presence in some of the territories of the region. So there is a long history there. I just want to recap a bit that many of the members of this panel have been part of the pushback and the attempt to speak out against what's happening. There have been a number of petitions sent forward to CARICOM, demanding that the governments protest the incursions by the U.S. military, the egregious breaches of international law, the extrajudicial killing of, I think it's now about 83 people and counting. And we've also heard from elder statesmen like P.J. Patterson calling for or reminding us that there has been a long history, I think, initiated by Grenada originally, to make the region what he calls a zone of peace. So with that, I want to turn to Kimali Phillip, who is herself a Grenadian. She is a trustee with the Groundswell Community Justice Fund here in Toronto, and a director of human rights at the Canadian Union of Public Employees. And she also lives and is based in Grenada. So over to you, Kimali.
Thanks, Honor. I wish I was home, but no, I'm in Toronto with others. So sadly not at home. But thanks for inviting me to be part of this, and it's really lovely to see your faces. I just want to start off by offering a lot of gratitude for folks on the ground back home in Grenada who continue to organize and protest and try to hold our government accountable for the most recent ask by the US to install military radar on our airport. Um, there's a Grenada Coalition for a Zone of Peace. There are many organizers, aunties, people just asking hard questions, calling the radio stations, and I just want to acknowledge the ongoing work that they're doing. Now, it's clear that there's a persistent and undeniable logic of imperialism that the U.S. has not only imposed for decades, but the very country is founded upon that. Um, and the U.S., as Tamanisha and Angelique have already spoken to and honor, like the U.S. has had a very long presence in the Caribbean. Um, but this particular ask of Grenada to install military radar carries with it a particular stench, and it feels very loud for us. Like it's very hard to get this one past the radar of the Grenadian population. So, yes, the US has had a very long presence, and this particular ask has really rallied the Grenadian population in powerful ways that I hope will be longstanding. I think it's also like folks have spoken to this, but I think I just want to situate a little bit before I talk about the revolution and this recent ask by the US government. Um, because we know Grenada, being a small island state of 110,000 people, not having a military, that we know that when the US asks us, hey, can we install some radar on your airport? It's not like a state to state equal partner conversation. We know that there is a risk that carries a particular political power and prowess that the US is doing. We know the ways in which the US has used economic warfare, setting up puppet governments, completely colonizing countries, invading our country under the guise of restoring democracy and the guise of protection. We were invaded before I was not even born when the U.S. invaded. I was born 2 years later. But if you speak to any Grenadian about the revolution, particularly older people, you can tell that it is still very much alive. There is still a simmering resentment or questions asked. Many of the bodies are still, we don't know where they are. So when the US now says, can we install radar, military radar, on the airport that was used as the rationale for invading our country, on the airport that was renamed Maurice Bishop International Airport, that carries a particular, it cuts deep, is what I would say. And our current Prime Minister, Dickon Mitchell, has not yet responded and has said things like, it's a technical response. We have to understand that Grenada does not have a military and this is a military ask. But so we are just kind of waiting. I also wanted to just say, too, that I don't know if any of you have been to Grenada, but near that airport, there is a massive arch, two arches. It's impossible not to see because it greets you as you enter the airport grounds. And these massive two arches are not just a sculpture, they're a symbol of US imperialism. That those two arches, there's a plaque that says it's honoring the US soldiers who were killed during the invasion. So you see these two arches as you enter the airport. And if ever you're on the island and you're at the airport, if you drive behind the airport, you'll see that there's a plaque for the Cuban soldiers, but it's very hidden. You may never see it because you really have to drive a bit and walk a bit to get there. So we know that one, as Grenadians, I think the majority of us would probably agree that we need to say no to this ask, and we also know that this will come with some repercussions, and I think we are okay with that. The Caribbean zone the Caribbean as a zone of peace, which is a resolution that was adopted at the Organization of American States, the OAS, in 1979, was led by Grenada, which Honor has shared. It passed unanimously, And so the US now asking Grenada, the very author of that resolution, to now instill military radar is also another very clear dismissal of the history and the ongoing unanswered questions that exist to this day. Many continue to speak out against it. I'll probably pause here because I want to like have others get some time, and maybe we'll have a conversation about what does it mean to take a position against a state that has probably done more financially for Grenada than the US has done over the years, which is Venezuela, but also just recognizing that I think we also need to tease out what we mean by a military presence in the Caribbean, because as I said, they've had a very long presence. We all have spoken to this. And this ask feels like a bit of a red herring too, like it's taking up so much attention, but there's so much more that we could be focusing on. So I'll stop here.
Okay, thank you. We would have gone to Danuta now, but we're actually remarkably on time. So it doesn't seem that Danuta has joined us yet. So
He's
Chris,
there.
Danuta is there.
Danuta is here.
okay, so I think what I'll do, if you don't mind, is go to Christoph Simpson, who is the former chairman of Jamaica Lands, which is the Left Alliance.
Danuta is here. Christoph just went off.
Oh, Danuta is here?
Yes, Danuta is here. She's been
Oh,
here.
great.
She's been here
Okay.
for a while. She's been here
Danuta?
since the
Ah,
beginning.
Danuta, there you are. Okay, great. So we'll go as planned.
Okay.
We'll go to Danuta, who's a longstanding human rights and environmentalist activist from Guyana, who's been working on gender justice, among other things, for many, many years. Danuta is one of the founding members of the Haiti Society of Guyana, which is very active around the defense of Haitians in the region. And she's also an active member of the BDS Guyana, the international movement to pressure Israel to end its war against Palestine through boycotts, divestments, and sanctions. So welcome, Danuta. In you, we have someone who is a kind of bridge between many of the global struggles that we're invested in right now. And we look forward to hearing from you.
So am I being heard?
Yes, you are.
Oh, okay, good. So thank you so much for inviting me to be part of this panel. And yes, and great to hear all the presentations from my Caribbean colleagues, which is quite amazing. And the other thing I would like to say is that I am so heartened that Haiti, and the situation in Haiti has been mentioned by, I think, all of the presenters, because we can never forget Haiti. So I'll just start by talking a bit about the Haiti Support Group of Guyana. We came into existence around the time of the devastating 2010 Haiti earthquake. It's a network of individuals from Guyana, the diaspora, Haitians living in Guyana, and others. So one of the first things we did is we fundraised for the Haiti earthquake relief for grassroots organizations working in Haiti. We've also been active, with media statements. We engaged in petitions, pickets. We met with the Secretary Generals of CARICOM delivering petitions, but also having discussions on these petitions. We arranged legal representation and direct support to Haitians living in Guyana who have immigration issues, and that continues to be a problem. And I think Angelica mentioned what is happening in Jamaica, where Haitians, the human rights of Haitian migrants are being violated. we also, in Guyana, and we know this because in Guyana we had similar problems. And so the Haiti support group, we arranged legal representation and direct support to Haitian migrants arrested and detained in Guyana between 2017 and 2021. And, you know, we also support Haitians living in Guyana as they navigate, you know, being migrants in a country where often, you know, there are many problems, which I won't go into here. The Haiti Support Group also made submissions to international UN bodies such as IACHR, UNCHR, ICCPR on the denial of human rights of Haitians, migrants in Ghana. Right, so I will skip some of the stuff I was going to say on Haiti, but I just wanted to present some facts. So according to the UN, 1.4 million people in Haiti have fled their homes, with an additional 15,000 uprooted just last week. 217,000 children are suffering from acute malnutrition. 5.7 million, which is more than half of the Haitian population, face high levels of acute food insecurity. More than 1,600 schools remain closed, making children more vulnerable to exploitation and recruitment by the paramilitary gangs, which control, as we know, about 80% of Haiti's capital. Over 16,000 Haitians have been murdered since January 2022 by the paramilitary gangs, massacres, killings, attacks on civilians, and as mentioned by others, using increasingly powerful, often trafficked weapons. There's also widespread sexual and gender-based violence taking place in Haiti, including gang rapes by paramilitaries who use sexual violence to punish, spread fear, and subjugate Haitians. So from 1898 to 2025, there have been at least 12 military interventions into the Caribbean, Nicaragua, and Panama, and with many countries experiencing multiple interventions. These include Cuba, 1898, 1917, and 1922, Haiti, 1914 to 1934, 19 years of occupation and military intervention, the Dominican Republic, 1905, 1907, 1914, and 1965, Grenada, 1983, and Haiti once again with the Kenyan invasionary force in 2025. So the present U.S. military present in the Caribbean is but one of the most recent ones. And I wanted to share this because it's something that I found. So besides the U.S. military bases in the Caribbean and Puerto Rico and Guantanamo, Cuba, the U.S. plans to establish new military bases in Aruba and Curacao, and have requested such permission from the Netherlands for these bases. So I think that this is something that we need as Caribbean people to work on with our sister countries. Thankfully, Ecuador, 3 days ago, voted against the establishment of a U.S. base in Ecuador. They had a referendum and they voted against it. So the other thing I want to say is I think the Caribbean response to U.S. military presence, this more recent one, has been spoken by others, including open letters were sent to the heads of government, the Caribbean heads of government from the Association of Caribbean People, and that was endorsed by 500 organizations and individuals. The Caribbean Women's Statement to the CARICOM Chair and Secretary General was endorsed by 112 organizations. A strong statement, which was referred here to by former heads of government, of which Patterson was one, was circulated. A petition by Grenadians was also drafted and circulated, as were individual statements from prominent Caribbean individuals. There were speak-outs, picketing of U.S. embassies, press conferences, and press statements from individual organizations across the Caribbean. All of these denounce the deployment of U.S. warships, etc., reaffirmed Caribbean as a zone of peace, denounced attempts to enforce regime change in Venezuela, and raised concerns about requests to set up a radar station in Grenada. And no doubt there were other activities that we do not know about. But and the Caribbean heads of government did issue a statement, not a very strong statement, but they did issue a statement. So there was resistance, and I think this resistance was also effective in staying the hand of this most recent military presence in Guyana. I think they recognized that generally throughout the Caribbean, this was not something that was really supported. And there were some prompts by honor, so I don't know if I have a thing, but I wanted to talk about key factors affecting responses to the US military presence and in relation to Guyana. So Guyana was, as you know, one of the two Caribbean countries which issued pro-US statements. For Guyana, though, there was also support for the Caribbean zone of peace. But for Guyana, Venezuela shares a land border with us and has a historical claim to 2/3 of Guyana, a matter which is before the International Court of Justice for settlement. So it is a factor. Guyanese responses to Venezuela's saber-rattling and aggression, which they have done. But presently, we also have, I think, more than 30,000 Venezuelans living in Guyana, migrants, many of them with family ties to Guyana, because years ago, when Guyana was in crisis, a sizable number of Guyanese also went across to Venezuela as migrants, you know, for a better life. Guyana's oil and gas industry, however, has an unbelievable exploitative production agreement contract, which has been granted to the largest US oil companies, ExxonMobil, the largest. Chevron is also part of this, as is the China CNOOC. So the extraction and exploitation of Guyana oil resources, in fact, is a huge factor in what is happening right now in the Caribbean in relation to the US presence. And while there is a sentiment in Guyana that having the US military's power and support will prevent Venezuela from entering Guyana and claiming 2/3. Guyana, of course, because of our history, I think there's a recognition of, you know, the negative impacts of US imperialism in Guyana, including the CIA destabilization for many years, which led to race riots in Guyana, and which is something that has never been properly documented and continues to affect the country.
Danuta, I'm going to ask you to wrap up. I'm worried that we're going to lose Christophe, who's got a very delicate connection.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you so much. That was great. Immediately, we're going to go to Christophe Simpson, former chair of Jamaica Lands and the Jamaican delegate to the ALBA Movimientos and the International People's Assembly. Chris is part of a new generation of young progressives in Jamaica, and his politics is built around anti-imperialism. Over to you, Chris.
Oh, thanks for having me. I've been listening to as much as I could. I missed a bit of the panelists from Trinidad in the middle and a bit towards the end, the panelists from Grenada. Some stuff that I would have said have been covered already. There are just some short points I'd make. And of course, whenever given the opportunity, even if not today, to elaborate on those. And I mean, some of these things most of you would be familiar with, but the point is to highlight them in this moment. And then
we're losing you, Chris. You're freezing.
Maybe if he turns his video off, it might
yeah.
help.
Can you hear me? If you can hear me, nod. I guess you can't hear me. I'll put it in the chat. What I think we should do is to go on with the conversation, and then hopefully we'll be able to bring him back. And then when, oh, are you there? Chris, we're losing you badly. Can you turn your video off? If you can hear me, can you turn off your video? Okay, I think, has he gone altogether? He's gone altogether. Okay, maybe he'll come back. In the meantime, let's pick up the discussion. Danuta raised a number of issues that kind of make very clear how complicated the situation is in relation to Guyana and Venezuela. And also a number of people, Chris in particular, I think, and also Danuta, wanted to talk a little bit about the forces for change on the ground. So maybe that's where we could go. What really are, what is the sense of the panelists about the sort of broad support for a kind of campaign against American imperialism and against this military buildup in particular in the region? And how is this complicated by the situation with the hurricane? Could you speak a little bit to that?
Are you posing this question generally, more generally to everyone?
Yes, just for everyone, because Chris is not able to make his presentation right now. So I think we can just open it up for a dialogue. So I'm throwing this out.
And Chris just came back on her.
Okay, Chris, can you hear me? Chris?
Oh, I'm back.
Okay, you have a terrible connection.
Yes, I could hear everybody clearly, and I heard the suggestion to turn the video off.
Yeah. Okay, this is a little better. Let's see how long it lasts.
All right. Yeah, give me with Dana. Yeah. All right. So I was saying I wanted to make some brief points, and then I get into the challenges posed by the hurricane. These would be things that most of you, if not all of you, would be familiar with already. But the point of bringing them up now is to just highlight them, right? I had said some more, but in the interest of time, let me cut to the points. So the first thing I want to mention, and I've heard it mentioned by Tamanisha John when we were discussing Haiti in another forum, is that the Southern Command and its cooperation with local security forces. When I say local, I mean regional security forces, police and military across the CARICOM member states in particular, is a legacy of the invasion of Grenada. The regional security system as well, I understand to be a legacy of that coalition that was formed to invade Grenada and overturn the government there. That's one thing. The other thing is the normalization of U.S. military presence in the region and the humanitarian disguise that it comes with has been something that Caribbean governments have been flip-flopping on. For example, the 2004 coup in Haiti, the Jamaican government condemned the kidnapping of Aristide and the coup, and the Jamaican government did not recognize the governments that were installed in Haiti for the first few years, but it reverted its position and ended up normalizing relations with the US-backed puppet governments in Haiti, right? Also, while I praise PJ Patterson for his strong stance on Haiti in 2004 and praise him for other aspects of foreign policy, PJ Patterson is also the same leader that welcomed the Shipwright Agreements in the 1990s and early 2000s. And the Shipwright Agreements, which continue to be renewed, allow the US Coast Guard to treat our territorial waters as their waters and enforce their domestic laws in our waters because they treat us as their border. So that allows them to harass our fishermen, harass other watercraft in our waters, and even before even before this year, Jamaican boats were attacked in the past, and they made the mistake of attacking a particularly wealthy person who was able to take it to court in the US and actually won against the US government twice. But no, these are not avenues that are available to working poor fishermen. And then especially now that it's involving killing, those avenues are not available to them. So these are things that we have been noting. The other thing that I wanted to bring and highlight now is that this manufactured tension between Venezuela and Guyana is something that the US has been trying to engineer since the early 2000s. From 2007 and 2008, documents from the US government itself, which I'm willing to supply if anybody demands it, because it was a part of the analysis that Lands did in 2023, show that they were interested in increasing their military presence in the region, and for the sake of getting access to resources. And they said that they needed to make sure that the military presence had a human face, because people tended to be critical of military presence, and they realized that their contending superpowers, especially China, are building relations that are not focused on military. So they needed the military in particular to start having a humanitarian face. These things were established in 2007, 2008, and become relevant to the challenges that we're facing now with the hurricane. But why I call that manufactured is that the territorial dispute hadn't been an issue between the Chavista government under Chavez and Maduro initially. And they even went as far as to denounce the right-wing governments of Venezuela that preceded them for pursuing this territorial dispute, which is something that we wrote about as well in our analysis and our internal debates, which we have made public since. So their reversal on that no it has been prompted by the US intervention into this issue. The US basically egged on Guyana to pursue this dispute, which is strange because in the past the US sided with Venezuela, but the anti-imperialists in Venezuela recognized that the US was doing this out of the US own interests, and ended up denouncing Venezuela's side of this, for which the right wing in Venezuela condemned the current government for basically giving up the Essequibo to Guyana in their own words. So this conflict between Venezuela and Guyana now is very manufactured by the imperialists, and they used to be on Venezuela's side in the past, and they're on Guyana's side now, and both sides have to remain vigilant, because even Guyana now needs to remember that the US was supporting Venezuela against them in the past. The US doesn't have Venezuela's sovereignty, doesn't have Guyana's sovereignty in mind. That's not what it's defending. And for that matter, it doesn't have the sovereignty of any Caribbean country in mind. Now, what I wanted to talk about with the risk posed by this disaster. Somebody else earlier talked about Haiti having gone through disaster. Basically, what happened after that each time, the rushes of aid, this idea that, oh, foreign savers are going to come and save Haiti from whatever. That is the narrative, and that is the face, and that is the front. But what they end up doing is like getting deeply involved in the country to advance their own interests. So NGOs backed by the private sector and foreign governments, as well as the foreign governments themselves, go and use Haiti as their proving ground for whatever they can. I've seen analysts talk about how even the Brazilian government under Lula at the time used this to show that Brazil was a major player in the international stage. And I've seen persons say no, that it's a similar thing that Mia Motley is doing, with siding with intervention now, despite her former stances, because she wants to prove that she's that type of internationalist, not in the way we use it, but in the way that they use it. So the risks that are posed now, especially with how devastating the hurricane has been in Jamaica, and I'm talking about the entire western half of the country was badly hit. Over 77% of the country at a point was without internet. At a point, not internet, sorry, power, electricity. At a point, over 77% of residences in Jamaica were without electricity. And that number took more than a week to go down below 60%. We're talking about situations where people did not have food, didn't know where the next meal is coming from, where people could not reach out to their families, and where basically everywhere outside of that stretch from Kingston, from St. Thomas coming back into Kingston and then to Portmore was without any telecommunications, not even just internet, but being able to make a phone call or sending a text message was impossible. The US and other forces stepped in quickly, and the US, because of its logistical capabilities, in part from having military presence in the region, became seen as a savior. So people who would be neutral on the US military usually see it as a savior now, and people like my own comrades who are very critical of the US, we remain critical of the US now, but it's not a wise time to be vocal about that criticism because the government and the mass media will shut you down really quickly. So that is the challenge that we're posed with now because we don't have the ability to respond to a disaster of this scale. And if we even talking about war and not a disaster, we have banked on this idea that the US will save us. And the US is arguably the biggest threat to our sovereignty. So we know we don't have Chinooks that can carry tons of aid from one section of the island to another. So we have to depend on the US for Chinooks. A single Chinook costs about 35 million US dollars. We'll never be able to afford that and maintain that. Our military is usually good with disaster response and preparedness, but it doesn't have the capability to respond in the way that we'd want them to. So because of that, we're seeing this influx of aid and support from forces that we're usually critical of, including El Salvador, including Israel. On the NGO front, organizations that we've been critical of in the past, we see them rushing in as well. Even World Central Kitchen. I don't know if you're familiar with World Central Kitchen and the controversy earlier this year. I think it was late last year. World Central Kitchen volunteers were murdered by Israel in Gaza, and World Central Kitchen acknowledges publicly. But then the head of World Central Kitchen, a chef which is in Jamaica now, doing the rounds, tagging the US Embassy in his posts and letting you know how he's here to help Jamaica. He went and shook hands with the Israeli president. He went and participated in photo ops with the Israeli president. So now when we are talking about Israel and the US and their bad intentions in getting involved in the country, when we talk about Israel in particular and their bad intentions and how they want to secure access to our water resources in the country, what their defenders will say is, oh, but these are the experts. They know water sanitation better than anyone. And who else is going to help us with water sanitation during a disaster? So that is the challenge that we're posed with now, having been critical of Israeli presence in the region, having been critical of US presence in the region, and Israeli, both US and not, but Israeli, both civil stuff and then their ties to our national intelligence, having been critical of those things leading up to this point, it becomes a very difficult environment for us now to be very public and vocal about that criticism. So that's the challenge that I wanted to share. I hope I summed up enough in the short time. I know I may have spoken very fast. I didn't want to take up too much time, and then the connection hasn't been so stable. But if there's anything to ask me, I'll try my best to stick around. And if I'm not around, I of course don't mind being engaged further to substantiate anything, to bring up back the sources for anything I've said, and so on.
Well, I can say that we definitely would like the sources, especially for the U.S. Ask of for strengthening its military presence in the region. That one, and I think there was another one you mentioned. It would be helpful to have those if you could send them to Bev. But let's open it up now. We have another 15 minutes or so to talk among ourselves. Chris has raised a whole lot of stuff. So I'm going to open up now and invite the panelists to talk with each other before we open up to questions from the general public. Tamanisha, please go ahead.
So before, when I was speaking, I was saying that something that hasn't really been mentioned, but it was just recently mentioned by Christoph, is the sort of reactionary role of the media, uh, not just in the West, but also in the Caribbean. You have a lot of media houses in the Caribbean repeating US media narratives without pushback. And reactionary journalism is very important to imperialism. I don't know if everyone would remember, but it was a lot of Caribbean journalists in the region after the revolution in Grenada, for instance, that were paid to actively lie and attack what was happening in Grenada. And we also see that happening today, where the media is justifying actions of imperialism and dependency that makes it harder for people on the ground to speak out against these contradictions that they're witnessing. And also, it is not just that the media repeats these media narratives uncritically, but they do so in favor of US regime change in Venezuela. I see so many people, for instance, talking about how the Maduro government is illegitimate. And I have to remind them there were over 130 election observers in Venezuela when the elections were had, including from the United States, and they all conceded that Maduro won those elections. Instead, every time you see a media narrative that he lost, they are citing the opposition. They are citing an opposition party saying that he lost. They're not citing international election observers. And those same international election observers went to Guyana, went to Trinidad, went to Jamaica for their elections. But somehow, when they say that those elections are credible, then we listen to them. And so we need to stop the false narrative that Maduro lost those elections. It is not true and it is not based in fact. It doesn't matter if you don't like Maduro, that doesn't mean that you can lie about him in order to support US regime change. The second thing that I think is very important for us to also remember here is that by the US own admission, Donald Trump said, Maduro said everything is on the ground, including the fact that he would step down and have elections in Venezuela. Donald Trump rejected Maduro stepping down and holding elections in Venezuela precisely because if elections in Venezuela were had today, the opposition party would not win those elections. And that's because the majority of support for Maduro comes from Black, indigenous, and poor Venezuelans. The opposition party, similar to the Bolsonaro or the Bolsonarista party in Brazil, is a predominantly white, much more wealthy party, and they don't have the number of people on the ground to make them a viable political force in Venezuela. So this is why even though Maduro can say, I'll step down and hold elections, Donald Trump rejects that. What they want is a puppet government in Venezuela. And I think that that is very important to emphasize, and this is what the media should be emphasizing. And so as we have this talk about sort of the hurricane in US military buildup, we must also acknowledge all of the lies in the media. It is not also the case that you have Caribbean governments who are working out of the goodness of their hearts. Some Caribbean governments actively pursue US imperialist interests in the region, and we should say that. Prior to the airstrike campaign occurring, Guyana, Trinidad and Tobago, and Jamaica all sort of were some of the minority exceptions with CELAC that rejected military buildup. And it is no surprise that Trinidad has come out very vocally in support of US military buildup. Guyana, they've taken like a half-half stance, and I think it's because in the interior regions of Guyana, they don't have this massive amount of government loyalty or support. And so if Guyana were to come out saying, no, we support military intervention, people in the interior don't want to see any, military in our spaces. And then Jamaica, the hurricane hit Jamaica hard, and it is no shock then that Jamaica is also in this midst of making security deals with the United States under the guise of humanitarianism, when it's really just sort of continuing its acceptance of US military forces. And so I just want to say that so that we're very clear on this call that what we're talking about is destabilization for imperialism.
Thank you. Thank you, Tamanisha. And I think Angelique wants to say something.
Yeah, I think it's also important for us to talk about elite power and how systems and structures of white supremacy are maintained, right, through power and through class and through business, multinational corporate interests. I don't think it's only government, although certainly we need to call out all of those ways that power works. So I think it's also important for us to think about the which parties are in power when we look across the region and how they are embedded with particular kinds of business deals, and different kinds of multinational and corporate, and frankly, the business of extractive industries, which we've already raised. And I will bring up the global tourism industry again, because that I think forces or yes, it forces governments to make certain kinds of choices. And people in power are wanting to maintain that power. I mean, I think we can talk about what has happened in Haiti over the years as well, that the elite are in collusion with U.S. imperial interests. And I think we see that across the region. And I want to also just add too that so I think when we think about, power, our Caribbean region, as I said earlier, we don't wield a whole lot of power. And so I think these are coerced and limited choices, as well as issues where folks want to maintain their money, right, and maintain their power. So I think we can talk about the hurricane post-recovery, certainly in Jamaica, but that is exacerbating what was already happening. Some of those deals were already there. And I also think no one's raised this issue of the catastrophe bond that the Jamaican government took out. There hasn't been a lot of attention on that. I think that's something we should bring up and talk about who benefits from that, because that happened. It wasn't widely known, and now that money is going to come into Jamaica, but I think we have to question, where is it going? I think building on what Christoph was talking about, there's still people in Jamaica who are very much struggling with a lack of access to basic needs and supplies. And so even though these humanitarian efforts are coming in, we also know there's deep, deep inequalities and inconsistencies in terms of where that recovery and where that relief is going. And we have to question the catastrophe bond. I can talk more about it, Kimberly, and share an article about that. And I think I want to talk a little bit about Trinidad before I pass on, to say that yes, I mean, I think that there are lots of reasons why Trinidad and Tobago, should have said no, but yes, but it has happened that our Prime Minister is accepting and supporting U.S. intervention, but not in the way that, Guyana is sort of, on the fence. Yes, because there's so many politics at play and so many issues of power at work. But our Prime Minister has been supporting the false narratives of narco trafficking, and the repeated false narratives about what's happening between the US and Venezuela, and even what's happening in Venezuela. And it is confusing in some ways, because Trinidad has long had a connection. Trinidad and Tobago and Venezuela have long had a migrant flows, the close proximity, long connections from indigenous populations who've moved across, to flows of migrants from across Trinidad in particular, to parts of Venezuela. But of course, since the past decade, with large groups of migrants from Venezuela coming to Trinidad because of political and economic uncertainty, the relationship has shifted and changed. So that is also a part of, I think, the conversation we need to continue to think through. And so it has deep. We are in a deep conundrum, a paradox, a very delicate moment where all of this is happening and unfolding around us, and we don't have, I think, a courageous leadership around this to speak out against it. Though, as we've already mentioned a number of times, civil society, community groups, and activists, of course, are speaking out against it. And we continue to call for peace and to call for alliance and solidarity across CARICOM, and we certainly need that. And I just want to close by saying that I think we do need these history, like we need to know and make the connections across our spaces, and continue to remind publics about these long, tenuous relationships, because I think so much gets lost. And because the media might and so often doesn't make those connections, we have to demand that, and we have to demand better of our media of course, and our political leaders and ask the questions. Kimberly, before I go, I will share about the catastrophe bond. You can just look it up. The Jamaican government insured itself with what's called a catastrophe bond, which I had never heard of before, but economists are kind of praising it, which is interesting because it's supposed to pay out 250 million US dollars, and it did so as soon as the hurricane dropped to the lowest barometric pressure, which meant that it was at the heights of a category 5 and beyond, what they don't even measure yet. And that money is supposed to go into recovery, but it is unclear how and exactly how that money will be maintained. But so that is Jamaica insuring itself. And so that's outside of US imperialism, humanitarian efforts. And so I think we still have to question that. And folks have a lot of questions on the ground about what's happening with those funds.
Okay, thank you. Kimali, did I see a hand there?
Well, no, but I could just say too, like, it seems like we may have something similar in Grenada, or actually, I don't know if it's in Grenada, but the Prime Minister, Dickon Mitchell, when he spoke at the United Nations last September, he talked about a Caribbean catastrophe risk insurance facility that was being established to allow these kinds of financial payouts to sort of recover swiftly from natural disasters. So I'm wondering if it's not just Jamaica, if there might be other countries who are either exploring this or have already implemented this. So I just wanted to name that, but I'll definitely check more out about this. And thanks for posting the link in the chat, Christophe. I also just want to quickly say that, Hurricane Ivan in 2004 was the worst hurricane that Grenada had experienced in 50 years. In fact, we did not think that Ivan was going to hit the island because hurricanes so rarely hit Grenada up until that point. And it was so catastrophic. I think we experienced about $200 million. We put ourselves in $200 million in debt, which was essentially 200% of our GDP at the time. Actually, no, it was 1.1 billion. Yes, 1.1 billion, which is 200% of our GDP. That was Hurricane Ivan. And then we experienced Hurricane Beryl last year, which was not as catastrophic as Ivan, but was still quite devastating. And it particularly hit Carriacou, which is part of our Tri-Island state. Carriacou and Petit Martinique got it the worst. And so even our government has acknowledged that we cannot continue to, become we are the recipients, small island states are the recipients of this ongoing climate crisis, a crisis by which we have not contributed to, but we continue to pay the price for. And when I say contributed to in terms of proportionality, and then we have these climate disasters happen, hurricanes that continue to get worse and worse over time because of the warming Atlantic Ocean and the warming seas. And then we incur incredible debt because we have to pay this back. And so, and we struggle under the weight of that debt. Many have talked about the ways in which debt is part of the imperial project, and it continues to keep small island states and previously colonized countries in the position that they're in. And so I think that at least in Grenada, they have been thinking about how to get around this. For example, perhaps putting in place a clause that allows for some debt relief or a period of non-repayment. But the reality is it's still a debt, it's still a loan, and it has to be paid back at some time. So I'll stop here because I'm sure Danuta would love to jump in, and I think we're short on time.
Danuta?
Yes, I would just like to start off by saying, because every time I'm part of a conversation with Caribbean people, it always strikes me that, yes, we share an environment, but we also know so little about each other and sometimes the issues that are affecting each other. And I think it's really important to understand the lived realities of people in our country, right? Because in terms of moving forward, finding solutions, being active, and dealing with advocacy, that is really important because, of course, what you want to do is to speak to people and recognize where they are, recognize what their issues are and their problems are. And one thing that struck me really in terms of this entire conversation is that basically, and I absolutely agree that there had to be a response to the military presence by the US. But it has been reactive in some ways. And so I'm thinking that really what we need to do is say, yes, terrorism, narco trafficking, however, it's one thing. That is a priority of the United States of America, and they've sent all their warships here to deal with that. Is that a priority of our Caribbean nations? I know for Guyana, narco-terrorism, narco-trafficking, etc., is not. We are a transshipment point more than having a whole number of, people who are addicted to drugs in our country. And there's the whole thing about marijuana, which should be made legal in Guyana. And there, many countries in the Caribbean have called for this. But I think we need to reset it and say, no, I mean, fighting and putting money and getting, having to make all these statements by Caribbean governments about something that is really not a priority for us. So we have to establish what our priorities are. And when we respond to this military presence, we respond, yes, fine, that is yours, but we have our realities, and including, environmental and economic justice, security, the vulnerability of small island states, reparations, clean energy, etc. That is where, we need to be going, and not kind of thing. So, I mean, I did also have some very kind of concrete things. So, and just some ideas. I think as Caribbean civil society, we need to explore and advocate for greater representation for civil society at CARICOM. I don't know how we should do that, but we should find a mechanism to press for this. I think also, and people have mentioned it here, I think we have to get the research and the data on the impacts of the US militarization in the Caribbean in relation to fishing, tourism, environmental pollution, etc. We need those facts and figures and research, because it makes your argument so much more, so much better. I think we need to target the Netherlands, Aruba, and Curacao about the US wanting to put military installations there, military bases. They already have a presence there, as far as I know, but that is. The thing about the radar sites is in South America, the US already has multiple radio sites all over South America. And in fact, what the research has said is that if you set up a military radar site, you're going to have at least 37 US personnel there to actually manage it, right? So we're not talking about, we're talking, and that's just for the small ones. I think we should think about having an actual campaign, working on a campaign, to raise awareness and resistance to US militarization, using music, visuals, social media messages. I remember hearing multiple calypsos and songs coming out of Trinidad in relation to what Kamla was saying. And these are very powerful things because it's part of our culture, so use our culture for this. And we should continue to network with each other. And I think really important for the diaspora, that students and student bodies, etc., also raise these issues, especially as part of the Caribbean diaspora, and frame it in the way that these are extrajudicial killings by United States of America, and they are against, well, US law also. So yeah.
Okay, I just want to underline a couple of things. We're coming to the end. I want to go back to a point made by Tamanisha, and that is the role of the media in manufacturing consent for all these things that happen for the US presence in the region, and for also sort of engineering the idea of the US as a country which we should all long to go to. And I wanted to link that point to the question of the activities of aid organizations in the region. One of the things that has struck me over the last 30 years is the increased NGOization of the society and the way in which that has operated to kind of siphon off activists and in a way silence activists. It's not that they don't speak anymore. It is that the NGO structure creates a kind of discourse which has a particular set of characteristics that kind of institutionalize dissent in a way that actually takes it out of the hands of the people on the ground. And I wondered if people had any thoughts about that and how that might play into the present bombardment with aid in some countries, and also in relation to the question of Haiti and how we might work there. I also wanted to come back to the question of the way forward, the very practical question of the way forward, which Danuta just raised. This is just an opening panel. This is just one example of one small example of a way in which we can come together to think about developing more consistent work on US imperialism in the region. And I'm just wondering what people's thoughts are about how to move forward on these discussions after today. It's already 12:19. So over to you guys for the last word. Maybe what we can do is just do a quick go round so that everybody gets a chance to say something before we get bumped off at 12:30. So back to Tamanisha.
So one thing I want to say is just to remember what Danuta said about talking to local people, because we do have in the region local bodies and organizations that exist that are already doing things actively in the community. And what we see is that in the times of natural disasters, people are often looking for NGOs that exist and have like some grand online presence and those things, when our local organizations are just like, people who work in them. And so then the NGO structure becomes this kind of professionalized thing that people can find on social media. And it is often those professionalized versions of it that aren't actually getting the resources to the people. And so we have to talk to people, and within our own organizations in diaspora and elsewhere, put down the names and contact persons of who to contact to get things to the local community so that people aren't searching for these NGOs. So I think that that is very important, since we don't have this professionalized type of stuff that people are always looking for.
Okay, over to Kimali. Last word, way forward.
Okay, quick. I'll just say I think one of the beautiful legacies of the Greater Revolution was the real presence of political education. People were having there was political education gatherings in every village, every community. And I think there is something there that we can lean into. The role of the arts, the role of cultural workers, the role of the calypsonians, the soca artists, they can also play a real important role. I think that there's a need to really tease out and interrogate what we mean by militarization, and really look at from the very benign and seemingly benevolent ways to the very brute forces of power and economic warfare. And I think if we were to really spend more time breaking that down in very accessible ways, using the arts, using visual, using political education, that can support us when we're talking to people on the ground. It can support us in doing work in schools. Young people were very involved in the revolution, and that was part and parcel of the larger political education. And I think there's just these areas that we've kind of lost our ways. And similar to what Tamanisha said, with the professionalization of education, teachers, NGOs, that has taken away from the political pieces that are crucial when we're talking about collective liberation. So that's what I would offer. And Angelique, I saw you had unmuted.
Yeah, I just want to echo that absolutely. It's through our cultural forms of resistance. I mean, in Trinidad and Tobago, we've already seen it with the Kaiso, the Calypso. We're going to see the political mass. We're going to see plays. We're going to see poetry that's certainly being crafted right now. At our Call for Peace demonstration a week and a half ago, Tree Canal came out and performed. There were dancers, there were drummers, religious leaders from across our multi-spirit and multi-religious society, people representing and speaking about faith and speaking about peace. We need more of that. I also see that coalitions are building and collaborations across civil society, community groups, grassroots organizing. We need more and more of that. And I do think that that destabilizes the, NGO-fication or the looking for the big NGOs. When we look and see, especially across gender, sexual rights and justice and climate justice, there are organizations who are working, especially around recovery efforts. So look for those organizations that are working on the ground. If folks need to get recommendations, reach out to those of us who are working with different groups. I think there are some really important alliances that help direct folks with who do you want to support and who do you want to build with. And I want to finally say that we have to resist and fight against different neoliberal agendas that are going, the disaster capitalism that is inevitably going to rise and continue to be something we have to battle against in post-recovery. And I'm going to say unnatural disasters, because what happens in post-disaster moments, from the earthquake in Haiti, we have seen this again and again, all the way to post Hurricane Melissa. We see the ways that we're still recovering. So many of our countries continue to need to recover because of our colonial, post-colonial, and neo-colonial situation. So I think that's really vital, and that we have to fight for gender, racial, economic, and climate justice together, organizing against dependency and debt, and including in our recovery and climate disaster preparedness, that we have to make sure that those most vulnerable, it has to be gender sensitive, and include those most vulnerable. And I think that is a part of how we can move forward. And then finally, I want to say that we have to call out US military intervention as being violent. The aggression and attacking and the extrajudicial killings are violent, and they are increasing and escalating a violent situation. And we have to do work in our public education to explain why these things are wrong, and increase the ways that we discuss them, because I think and that is the kind of building of solidarity and awareness that we absolutely need. And we need more spaces like that to do that work with across organizations and across groups and across our region.
Hey, I think that I have to call it there. There's so much rich ideas. There's so many rich ideas here, and so many things for follow-up. Among the things that we didn't get to really go into, but was mentioned by several people, was the question of sort of amnesia around struggles that have happened in the past, and the sort of way in which we rob people of the opportunity to learn from historical experiences of the region, and the way in which simple things like not knowing enough about each other, and the way in which we operate on the ground. This is one product of the sort of atomization of the region as it has developed under the neoliberal order. There's also, coming out of this discussion, a really strong set of information that is not popularly available to people on the ground. And I think that one possible thing that we might think about and put to bev is a way of taking forward some of this, the material that was generated here, in ways that might make it accessible to some of the organizations that Angelique and others mentioned are active on the ground. We certainly have to continue to oppose extrajudicial killings, the harassment of fishermen, the destruction of our tourist trade, and the disrespect for the region as a zone of sovereignty, as a place of sovereignty. And that, in a way, is what this panel has has been all about. Thank you very much for joining us, and thanks to all our wonderful panelists for everything that they have presented and for all the work that you did in order to be here and to talk to us. We hope that this won't be the end of this discussion. Thanks again, and forward ever, backward never.
Thank you very much. Also, it was great to be here and to hear Caribbean colleagues speak about these issues. Just wonderful discussion.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Honor.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Beverly, Alessandra.
Bye, everybody.
Take care, everyone.